Out of the 81.5 million families in the United States, there are approximately 16 million families in which not one single family member is employed. That's about 1 of every 5, or roughly 20%. Now, this number, as shocking as it is, has been relatively steady since the Bureau of Labor Statistics began tracking it in 1995. According to the Bureau, unemployed means an individual who has actively sought out work in the past month. So that does not even include those who have given up. Joining me now to weigh in on this discussion on the economy is David Mueller. He's professor of economics at King's College. Economist Peter Schiff, he joins us by Skype. Thanks, Peter. And personal finance expert Jordan Goodman. And gentlemen, before we get started with these, I want to look at a couple of numbers because I had to look these up myself. I know that for a while I've been on Dennis's show talking about the fact that this is the worst economic recovery from any recession in the United States history, but I didn't know just exactly how bad. The GDP in 2015 was 2.38%. That glosses over the fact that we had a fourth quarter that was less than 1% growth. The projected growth for GDP in 2016 this year is 2.67%. It's right there on the screen, but I couldn't see it. That glosses over the fact that many economists, and I think Peter might fall in this group, who expect to see negative growth in this quarter, raising the question, are we in fact in a recession? So Peter, let's start. I know that you've been rather bearish on this the economy and where we are. So are we, do you think, at the point of a recession, or do you think we have a little ways to go before we get there?
Well, first of all, I don't think we ever actually recovered from the last one. I mean, you say it's the weakest recovery ever. I think it's because it's not a recovery at all. I mean, if you look at nominal GDP, the entire recovery, we've had nominal GDP that is consistent with recession. It's only because the government has convinced everybody that there's no inflation. But if inflation is actually 1 or 2 percentage points higher than what the government is using to calculate the GDP deflator, then in fact, we have never recovered. We're in recession. And in fact, if you look at the typical American, he is worse off financially than he was when this so-called recovery began. He has a lower net worth. Right. He has lower real income. He has more debt. The home ownership rate has collapsed to the lowest in about 50 years. So most of the ways we measure well-being or standard of living, people are worse off today than they were when the recovery supposedly began. And normally the recoveries are better than the recessions, but this recovery is worse than the recession for most people. For some people, obviously, if you had a lot of money in the stock market, maybe it's been okay for you. But I think everything the government has done in the last 6 or 7 years to artificially reflate the stock market bubble and the housing bubble has actually undermined the real economy and prevented the legitimate recovery that would have taken place absent all this government intervention from actually happening. And now I think we're back statistically. I think at this point the economy is so weak that we're statistically back in recession, which is why I expect the government to do more of the same failed stimulus before the end of the year, which is to cut rates back to zero and launch QE4. Well,
and as much as I hate to give confirmation to the negative outlook by Peter Paul, I'm going to, that was going from Peter to Paul. Usually we go from Paul to Peter, don't we? But, you know, the average, assuming that the projections for 2016 are right, we do get 2.7%. We are looking at an average yearly annual GDP under President Obama of 1.55%. So it goes right to Peter's point. If, in fact, we are looking at inflation that is a couple of percentage points higher than what we've been looking at, we really never did come out of this at all.
You know, that's true. I think people have called it the jobless recovery for a reason, right? Where we haven't seen a lot of job growth, where traditionally after recessions we see a huge uptick in growth, and we haven't really seen those jobs. Instead, what we've seen is increases in government spending, we've seen increases in regulation, and so what we need to think about is why is America becoming less competitive in the market in general, and why is that resulting in not as many jobs and wages that are stagnating, or people who are getting entangled in the safety net? Well,
you know, Jordan, you follow personal finance, so you've got a kind of a better handle maybe than the rest of the group in terms of just where people are. Peter referenced we're worse off. A lot of us are much worse off.
They're hurting out there, Bill.
They're hurting. And the rich did, in fact, get a little richer. The poor got a little poorer, and the middle class has gotten squeezed down into the lower class.
You're seeing some pretty high-paid jobs getting cut. Intel, 11,000 last week. Caterpillar, all these big companies, some pretty well-paying jobs are disappearing. The jobs that are being created are low-wage, in many cases, no-benefit kinds of jobs. So the jobs that they say the overall jobs numbers are up, and officially it's a 5% unemployment rate, but I think that's vastly overstating how number of jobs have been created here.
Peter, what happens next in this economy? I know that you see a dire scenario. Are we looking at negative interest rates and a really bad period in this economy?
Well, hopefully we won't go to negative rates. Negative rates will be doing even more damage than 0%. But, you know, I wouldn't put it past them. They've tried it unsuccessfully in Japan, and they've tried it in Europe. So it might be coming here. But, you know, on the jobs, we've been destroying good-paying jobs.
Right.
The jobs that we've been creating, not only are they low-paying, but they're part-time. And in fact, a lot of the jobs that have been created are held by the same people, because people now have 2 or 3 part-time jobs. And so that's why it looks like there's so many jobs being created, because so many businesses no longer hire full-time workers. They've had to basically replace their full-time workforce with part-timers. And so now we have record numbers of waiters and bartenders, because every waiter is holding down 3 jobs instead of 1 job. And so this is what President Obama defines as progress, because he takes credit for all the low-paying part-time jobs that were created, but he doesn't accept responsibility for the higher-paying full-time jobs that he destroyed in order to make possible those low-paying part-time jobs.
Well, you know, and to the point, one of my favorite figures, and I use favorite in quotes, is the U6 indicator in the unemployment aspect report. That U6 number is 9.9%. That's in contrast double the official unemployment rate of 5%.
That's counting kind of discouraged workers, certainly. But you know what's strange, Bill, is while that's all happening, there's a big disconnect in the workforce. There's about 5 million jobs that are available that there is nobody to take those jobs. They don't have the skills for them. So a lot of people, older people are retiring now, mechanics, plumbers.
Why don't, Peter, I'll open the floor up to this, and maybe, Paul, you take it. You work in college. Sure. If, in fact, there are 5 million jobs that nobody has the skills for, how about this radical thought? How about the company spend money training people to do those jobs instead of just sitting there saying, nobody to do those jobs, let's bring in people from outside of the country who could do those jobs. Those people, in fact, were trained to do those jobs by the people that are bringing them in, the H-1B visa companies. Why aren't we looking at the government to say retrain people, and why isn't industry doing that?
Well, I think that's an excellent question in terms of, I'm sure some companies are, but the question is, what are the expenses of training people who have a better educational background, or people from around the world who have higher degrees in mathematics or in programming, other sorts of skills? One big problem that we can think about is that in the higher education system that we have, right, the way we fund it and the way we set it up is there's not much difference between getting an English major or an engineering major, right? In terms of the funding and what you do, there's no market signal in education to show, hey, engineering is actually more valuable, programming is more valuable. Whether you want to do English or sociology or other studies, that there's not a good market mechanism to kind of encourage young people to think about their careers and to think about, you know, what I majored in college, what I study, what I learned to do. It's going to have a big impact on what I'm able to work at in the future.
But there's a systemic problem there. I have a daughter who has an undergraduate degree in English, and she's doing very well for herself, and she's well employed. There are people who have engineering degrees, and I'll go to Peter on this one since I'm going to point at his industry, who are no longer working in engineering, who aren't doing anything substantial. They're being hired for really sweet numbers and going to work for Wall Street. So there's a systemic problem here, Peter, as well.
Well, yeah, and you know, obviously we have our young people unfortunately lured into colleges based on some kind of promise that just getting a degree, any degree, no matter the cost, is somehow going to ensure you a good job when you graduate. And unfortunately, that's not the case. And so people have lots of debt, and they have majors really that have no marketable value. And for companies to try to hire these people and train them, it's very expensive to train them. And a lot of the people don't want these jobs. But I think a lot of the jobs that are going unfilled are really the part-time jobs. That's why we have so many job openings, because companies need a lot of part-time people. And sometimes it's hard to find all the part-time help that you need, because not everybody's hours will work with the hours that you want. And then, of course, when you're talking about part-time jobs at low pay, there are a lot of people that would prefer government welfare programs or unemployment benefits to accepting these low-paying part-time jobs. So I think that's another reason why you still have so many vacancies.
Okay, I'm going to do the utterly bad TV thing. We got like 2 minutes left, and I really wanted to get into Social Security. We've got a system that more and more people believe is on a crash course to insolvency. Literally 2 minutes left. We're not going to solve this problem. But Jordan, you started to jump in there, so I'll give you first word on this and make it short. Do we need to cut benefits? What needs to happen?
Something's got to happen on both sides of Social Security, because we have 10,000 people a day turning 65, adding, and we have fewer workers paying into the system. It's basically was designed as an insurance system. You pay in, you get out, but there's more people getting out than putting in. So it's definitely going towards a crisis. If you get your official Social Security statement, it says right on there, in 2032 we ran out of money. So here we are in 2016. It's inevitable, and none of the candidates are really talking about doing anything about Social Security.
Well, I didn't want to retire anyway. Paul, your quick
Yeah, I
thoughts.
mean, Social Security, it's totally unsustainable. We have to figure out, meet commitments to seniors who have retired, but we need to start changing the program so that people have individual retirement accounts. I mean, that's the only way we're going to solve this problem systemically. When Social Security was first passed, the tax was anywhere from 2 to 6%. Now they're taxing people over 12% to pay for this. You can't just keep increasing taxes to sustain a system
And of course,
that
when
Go ahead, Peter.
doesn't work.
When they first started it, self-employed people were exempt. They didn't even have to pay into the tax because the government assumed if you're smart enough to be self-employed, you're smart enough to save for your own retirement. Look, this was a con from the day that Roosevelt sold it to the American public. It was sold as an insurance system. Instead, it was a Ponzi scheme, and no Ponzi schemes can work. Just because it's run by the government doesn't mean that it's going to be more successful than what Bernie Madoff did or Ponzi himself. So look, we got to end this program. We got to admit that it's a failure. It's already out of money. And it's going to bankrupt the country if we try to live up to these commitments. It is impossible to do it. The sooner politicians can have the courage to admit this, then we can begin to solve the problem. But Social Security is completely unsustainable.
Yeah, well, we had 2 votes in the program to get rid of the system, reform it with something else. Jordan, are you yay or nay fast?
I'm a nay. See,
He's a nay. He wants to keep it, folks. Write your cards and letters to
improve
Jordan
it,
Good.
but we got to keep it.
There you
yes.
go. Let us know what you think. Send us an email at dnlreport@newsmax.com. Peter, Jordan, Paul, thank you all for being with us. We'll be right back.